Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by a return guest, Dr. Rebecca Newberger Goldstein. She's, of course, for people who don't know her, a philosopher, novelist, public intellectual, and today we're going to talk about her latest book, The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. So, Dr. Goldstein, welcome back to the show. I mean, it's been 7 years. So
7 years, yes, 7 long, eventful years since I saw you last, yes.
Yeah, we went through an entire pandemic and
Yes, and all sorts of world-shattering events. So
yeah, which perhaps are somewhat relevant to the matter we're going to talk about today. So actually, matter, I mean, it's interesting that I use that verb here. So what is it to matter?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Yeah. So, of course, we speak about what matters, and we speak about who matters. And I think in both cases, if you get down to its very core, it means to be deserving of attention. When we say something doesn't matter, it's not deserving of attention. I think that's the basic core meaning. And I think it opens, to look at that definition, opens the concept up to how interesting it is, because attention is very interesting, yes.
Yeah.
But deserving, this term it's what philosophers call a normative term. It involves norms of justification. It involves justification. It involves values, deservingness. So, yeah, when we're saying that something matters, we are invoking norms of justification, values, and that's the kind of creatures we are. We are creatures of matter who belong to matter. I think that gets at the very essence of us, and shows why we are so very different from the other animals with which we share this planet. Not very well. We don't share it. We don't respect other animals very, very much. It's hard enough to get us to respect all humans. But in any case, that really shows the sort of normative core of us.
Mm-hmm. And why do you call mattering an instinct? I mean, do you look at it as something that has evolved, that is part of our evolved psychology?
Yeah, I do. And I take it back to the very basic laws of nature, which is physics. I started out in physics. It's been a long road away from physics. And I have always, since I was an undergraduate, been obsessed with the second law of thermodynamics, the law that says we are all tending towards everything in the universe itself is tending towards disorder, randomness, exhaustion. And I thought, even, as a student of physics, wow, this somehow has some sort of human dimension to it, right? And it does. That's one of the things I'm trying to solve in this book. But because entropy means literally transformation from within. And what it says is that in a closed system, meaning one that doesn't have recourse to external sources of energy, in a closed system, entropy increases until it reaches equilibrium, in which no work can be done, nothing can be done, and that's the direction of everything, sadly. But we living systems are not closed systems. We living organisms, being a closed system is not compatible with life. We have recourse to external energy in the form of food, low entropy food and light. And that's how we can do the work of resisting entropy. And all the laws of biology are derived, as the great physicist Erwin Schrödinger wrote in What is Life, they're all derived from this resistance to entropy. That's the business of life. Yeah. Viva la resistance, right? That's what life is. So, what this means is that we all evolved, every living thing from the bacterium to us, us complicated creatures, have evolved to take our own perpetuation, our own survival, our own flourishing as fundamental. We're devoted to this. And we creatures who have evolved attention spend the bulk of our attention on ourselves, on the environment, and how it relates to us. We have evolved to feel ourselves automatically, by default, by nature, by biology, by the deepest organizing principle of all the instincts, to feel ourselves to be deserving of attention, like nothing else in the world is. So that has evolved in us. But something else has also evolved in us, and only us, which is with these complicated, big, energy, hungry, greedy brains of ours, because they have to be so ordered, and it takes so much energy to fight the entropy that keeps our brains ordered. We have evolved the capacity for self-reflection. That's another capacity that we have evolved. When you put these two things together, our paying so much attention to ourselves and our ability to step outside of ourselves in this evolved capacity for self-reflection and look at ourselves and see how much attention we pay to ourselves, how much attention we feel ourselves to be deserving of, the question arises in us, the existential question: why am I deserving of all of this? Why do I feel that I matter so much? There's such a gap, unless we're a lunatic, some of whom are right now in power in our world. Unless you are such a lunatic that you think you are the most important thing in the whole world, for those of us who are less than who are not lunatics, we ask, how do I justify this? And we want to get to work, improving ourselves somewhat more deserving, worthy, earning this attention that we have to pay to ourselves. I compare it to, we have, I don't know, this is true all over the world, but we have in our universities, certain students that we call legacy students. They're going to get in, their parents gave a lot of money, and they're going to get in, whether they deserve it or not. I've had such students, legacy students. Some of them work their little butts off to get in on their own merits. It's guaranteed they're going to get in. Their parents' money is going to get them in, but that's not what they want. For their own self-respect, they want to earn their admittance. That's what we're like. By default, we're going to pay ourselves tremendous amount of attention. We have to in order to pursue our complicated lives. There's something called the default network mode, when we're not paying attention to anything out there. What are we paying attention to? Ourselves. We're fantasizing, we're remembering, we're wishing, it's ourselves. So to see this and is to want to rationalize it, to justify it. That gives rise to what I call the mannering instinct. So it's sort of the collision or the joining together of two evolved instincts. Is that
right?
Yeah.
Yes, it makes sense. But But let me ask you then, because do you agree that when it comes to mattering for us as humans, it's not mattering in a sort of absolutely individualistic and atomized manner, right? We care about mattering to other people as well, and we care about our social standing, and we care about how we matter to the people we have relationships with, because of course, as people like Joe Henry, Karen Ornstein, and Stephen Hine coined the term weird. I mean, we in the West tend to live in these weird societies, right, where we care a lot about our individualism, but actually it's not just about us as individuals. It's also about our relation to other people and our social standing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Freud had said that the two cornerstones of humanists are love and work. Now, I would amend this somewhat. There are two cornerstones of our well-being, our flourishing, deep down motives without which we feel that our lives are not going well. One is what the social psychologists call belonging or connectedness, that there are people who you regard as in your life, and that they will pay you special attention, whether you deserve it or not. I mean, this is certainly how I feel about my family. I will pay them attention whether they deserve it or not, and my friends. So it's sort of what it is to be a friend. One's lovers, one's spouse, one's family, one's, maybe one's colleagues, one's community, one's neighbors, whatever. People who are in your life, and without that, and you may not love them. I think Freud's word "love" is a little too specific. No, I mean, they may drive you mad, but they are in your life, and you have this connection to them, and you matter to them, and maybe they even matter to you, which is the way it ought to be, but isn't always. So that's connectedness, right? But there is this other, and it has to do with our relationships with others. And it can also be put in the terms of mattering. And often when I talk about mattering, that's what people assume I'm talking about. No, I'm talking about this other thing that is also a deep motive. Freud says work. And that shows you a lot about how he went about trying to satisfy his mattering instinct by way of his intellectual work. But there are many ways that people have in order to feel, in order to do right by not their relationship with others, but their relationship with themselves. This sort of existential moment that I think we all go through, maybe particularly when we're adolescents or early adulthood, but for some of us over and over again, who need convincing again and again that we truly matter. I certainly belong to that group. But that we have to convince ourselves that we are deserving of our own attention, that we care so much about ourselves. Why should I? What makes me deserving of all of this? If I would estimate the size of something by how much attention I give it, if that's the measure of how much something matters, it would seem, and it seems that way to each of us, that the thing we think matters the most in the universe is ourselves, given all the attention that we give it. And that causes a deep unease. And we try to go about making all the attention we give ourselves more commensurate with who we are. We go about it in such different ways. Freud, yes, work. I'm also of that sort. Work, yes. Yes, I have to be working constantly. But which is not to say that the connectedness is not important. The connectedness is always, that's a given. We are gregarious creatures, evolved from gregarious creatures. We can explain that very, very well. But there's this other thing, this other existential need. And I divide, so I think we're all alike in this, that we need this. And then I divide us into 4 different groups according to which are strategies for trying to go about realizing this mattering, this longing to matter. We're creatures.
So that's the socializers, the transcenders, the competitors, and the heroic strivers, right?
Yeah. And I have been talking to people about this ever since my first book, which was published in 1983. And I laid out this mattering thing. And it was really to try to understand my main character, who was very different from me. And my editor said, why is she so unhappy? And I said, oh, why is she so unhappy? She feels like she doesn't matter. And that got me thinking since 1983 about this thing. And I talk to people about this all the time. Most of my conversations are about this. You sit next to me on a bus, we're going to start talking about mattering. I want to hear how you go about it. I've never met anybody yet as different as the people I've been speaking to over these past over 40 years who didn't fit into one of these four categories. We can change them. The transcenders, the socializers, the heroic strivers, and the competitors. But so far, everyone I've spoken to, read about, I read a lot of biographies and such, fit into these. So should I explain what they are?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, so I just want to make sure that it's somewhat empirical, not formally. I'm open to counter examples, right, and falsification, but this is what I have found. So the transcenders are those who want cosmic mattering. They want to feel that they were created by a particular purpose, by a metaphysical transcendent being, whether they call it God or something vaguer, Atman, whatever, something trans-empirical that created the laws of nature, created perhaps the laws of morality, and who created them purposefully, intentionally, so that they actually have a role to play in the narrative of eternity. There is no greater sense of mattering than that. I am not a transcender, but I recognize and I respect as a manifestation of the longing to matter. Transcenders, those who go about it in this way.
Would you include religious people, ascetics, and people like that among the transcenders?
Yes, and anybody who thinks that our reason for living, for existence, it has something to do with the nature of the cosmos in general, that our mattering is out there in some sense, and we have to recognize it. Of course, transcenders recognize many different forms of this, hence, they can disagree with each other sometimes very bloodily, right? Religious wars, jihads, crusades, all these things, right? But this, you got to give it to them in terms of mattering, short of lunacy, and short of thinking that you yourself are transcendent. This is a very, very satisfactory. And so many of the religious people I talk to, or spiritual, it doesn't have to be the conventional religions, will say to me, since I don't have such a metaphysical belief, what gets you out of bed in the morning? How do you proceed with your life? How do you know what's right? What's wrong? This is one of the things I say in the book is, the transcenders tend to universalize, but so do other people as well. We'll get to that. Let me just talk about these other. Which ones should I do next? Socializers, heroic strivers?
Yeah, let's perhaps do the socializers.
Yeah, socializers. I have found in my informal discussions, most people seem to be socializers. That is, they collapse this connectedness, with, well, I should say that. Most of the people I talk to, most of the people I talk to tend to think of mattering in terms of mattering to others. It may be mattering to those others who are in their lives, the family, the friends, the lovers, the colleagues, neighbors, whatever. Or it may be perfect strangers, like the need for fame, the longing for fame, to matter to hordes of strangers, to be feeling that you're deserving of attention of all of these people can make you feel like, yes, you are deserving of your own attention. If all the world is waiting to see what I eat for breakfast or who my next romantic partner is or whatever the hell, yeah, then I must matter. I found it's really interesting. There are actually studies that show that the desire for fame has really grown. And that's very interesting, and we can talk about that. But the younger generation, certain questionnaires have shown that they would be willing to do all sorts of things, have no romantic partner, not have children, move to another place if they can be famous. So, but that is the mattering to others. You may want to dominate the others. It's not necessarily wholesome.
So do you think that perhaps people who post too much on social media are socializers?
Yes, and you get a certain something. I used to tweet because my publisher said, "Oh, you're not on social media at all. You gotta get on there." And I used to tweet, and I remember when people paid attention to me in that way, when they liked it or retweeted, I would feel a little something, not much, because that's not my way of trying to matter. But yeah, it does make you feel something good. People who live for fame tend not to actually be so very happy often. And that's interesting too.
I was going to say that is actually interesting because many of, for example, the ancient philosophers and some of the more modern ones actually warned against caring for fame or putting fame on a high pedestal.
Exactly. It's a very unstable kind of grounding for your mattering. To me, this constant attention from strangers. That's basically what it means to on fame. And it's unstable, and these crowds are fickle, and it can drive you to do crazy things. There's a Wikipedia page that is devoted to all the deaths of people who did outrageously crazy things in order to, go viral. People climbing, doing nutty things, and it's, but it really, this is a form that the longing to matter can take. And anyway, so socializers.
How about the competitors then?
Competitors are interesting in that sense. They are really people who feel that mattering is zero sum. They to the extent that they feel that they matter, they have to feel that they matter more than others. And for some of them, can I mention a political figure?
Sure.
Our very own president here in the United States. I mean, he's in competition with everybody. He has to prove he's better than everybody in everything, except for his own flesh and blood, who are regarded as extensions of themselves, or his lackeys, But he is such an out there picture of the extreme competitiveness. Sometimes competitors can seem like the next group that I'm going to talk about, heroic strivers. And I'll just say briefly what they are. They are people who, they're not trying to impress other people. They are really, it's all about, they have certain standards of excellence, could be intellectual, artistic, athletic, or ethical, right? Mm-hmm. That they have to meet in order to be able to live with themselves, in order to have this relationship with themselves of mattering. Back to competitors. So there's a scientist I know, very good scientist. He got a Nobel Prize, as a matter of fact. And another friend of mine who knows the scientist said to me about him, said he was happy for all of 15 minutes when he got that call from Stockholm. And then he remembered that other people have gotten Nobel Prizes also. He was no longer happy. So, competitors can, they can do the amazing things that heroic strivers do, but in terms of their own mattering, it's adversarial. And so the inner being of them is very different. I think it's very hard to be a competitor. You can never rest on your laurels, not even Nobel laurels, right? It's just incredible. You're always, and it really tends to distance yourself from other people. Everybody is potential, unless maybe your own flesh and blood, or those you can regard as extensions to yourself. It's your competitor. It's not a great way to live. Anyway, but so it's interesting, why we fall out one way or the other. But we do. It can change. I started life as a transcender. That's the way I was brought up. But it didn't suit me. I couldn't do it. It didn't hit the sweet spot at all. And so my own nature came out. So I think it's temperament, talent, interest, culture to some extent. But somehow or other we fall out in these very different ways. So the very thing that makes us human, so uniquely human, drives us apart. So makes us live lives that are so different, to the extent that we can be completely baffled, amused, and appalled by one another. It usually goes back to the mattering instinct and how we're realizing it.
So, where would you include intellectuals? Do you think that being an intellectual and caring about truth with a capital T involves at least some degree of transcendence?
It depends. Yeah. Not transcendence in the way that I'm using transcenders.
Sure.
The way I'm using transcenders, it really does require this metaphysical belief. But there, if you think of, as many heroic strivers do, think of what I call your mattering project, the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning and to work. If you think of it in terms of such ideals as truth, or justice, or these ideals, these abstract ideals, in some sense, there's a kind of transcendence. Yes, there is, in that sense, kind of Platonic sense. Yes, there's that kind of, transcendence. This is something bigger than me. Truth, justice, courage, whatever, human excellence. It's somehow, however you think about it. It's something bigger than myself. Yeah.
Do you think that cosmic mattering, and for example, when we as humans attribute some degree, or we think that we are special in comparison to other animals, special biologically or special in a more creationist manner if you are a religious person, do you think that those kinds of mattering involve at least some degree of delusion?
Delusion. Well, I think in some sense, maybe you'll call me delusional. I think there is a sense in which our species is very special, that we, like all creatures, are driven to, devote all our energy to basically ourselves. That's the organizing principle of all the instincts. But unlike the other creatures who have their own dignity, I take animals very seriously. I'm a true animal lover. But we have this need to justify this, our own biologically given drives. And that is, I really do think that, people talk about the intrinsic dignity of humans and what does that mean? It's so vague. I never understood what that meant. I think we are vaguely gesturing towards this. There's something dignified about this, even in the worst of us. And we have so many specimens on display, that there is something about it, that feeling the need to justify your own self, your own existence, your own identity, because your identity is basically constituted of this striving to perpetuate one's own survival and flourishing. And we think, yeah, what makes me worth this? What do I have to prove to myself about myself that would make me deserving of this? Even if you decide the worst way, power over others, I'm going to matter by marching into Ukraine or whatever, right? Terrible ways of going about it. And we need a standard to adjudicate between good and bad ways of, and I tried to answer that as well, but there is something estimable in our species, that we are normative, that we are seeking values, even if we end up with very bad values, that there is something there. But so I don't think it's delusional. I think there is something to this, that there is an intrinsic dignity to human beings because of this, because of the normative dimension that we encompass, matter longing to matter. That's what we are, matter longing to matter. And that is something. But animals don't gain their dignity by being similar to us. That is arrogant. That is
anthropocentric.
Yes. But they gain their dignity on their own terms, and we ought to recognize that. But yes, there is something special, I would say, about because of this capacity, these big brains, capacity for self-reflection, we become value seekers. We bring values into this world. That's something.
So you're a philosopher. What do you think is the role, if any, that philosophy can play in our mattering?
Well, philosophy is a wonderful subject. It's some people, that's how they pursue their mattering. It's an intellectual endeavor, right? I think, and for most of my life, I have to confess, I was interested in very little technical problems in philosophy. I came to philosophy from the sciences, from math and physics. I was interested in solvable technical problems. But I think much of philosophy is devoted to problems like values, this sort of thing, that face all of us. That by being matter longing to matter, we unavoidably enter into philosophical territory. And some philosophers have an awful lot to tell us about that. I'm a great fan of the philosopher Spinoza, who, of course, derived from Portuguese roots. His dad, his mom were born in Portugal. He went to Amsterdam. The family went to Amsterdam in the 17th century. But anyway.
Yeah, and my compatriot Antonio Damasio also has a book on Spinoza.
Yes, we've been on panels together. We are both great fans of Spinoza. Spinoza was prescient about so much. And I've taught Spinoza. It was a very unusual thing to do, having come from philosophy of science and philosophy of math. But I find, that he sheds a tremendous amount of light. And he made the Enlightenment. He seeded the Enlightenment. It came 100 years after him. But he is the first person of the modern world to try to answer these deep existential ethical questions through reason, because, it began in ancient Greece.
Yeah.
But then, the transcenders took over the world, and all
the scholastic philosophers.
The scholastic philosophers, but they were all religious thinkers, and everybody identified themselves in terms of their religious orientation. Saw great periods of persecution, depending on disagreements between transcenders. But, in the 17th century, and he really is, I got to say, the first to go back to those ancient existential questions. What is it to be human? What are we supposed to be doing here? How do I justify myself to myself? How do I live a life that is meaningful in my own eyes? That the Greeks had begun, and goes back to it. And then, of course, he was excommunicated by his own Jewish community, and damned by the rest of Christian Europe. So, but people read him. They read him in order to refute him. In order to make any progress in academia, you had to have your refutations of Spinoza lined up and study them. That was very dangerous because people read him, and slowly his way of thinking began to sink in. And 100 years later, we have the Enlightenment. So, yeah, ideas really matter, especially these kinds of ideas, the kinds of ideas that are directed to what it is to be human, what it is to have a satisfactory life, a good life, to not get our one chance of this wrong.
And what is your approach to religion? Because, of course, and I've talked on the show with many cognitive scientists of religion already, and religion for many people, I mean, I guess still for a majority of humanity, plays a big role in their own mattering projects, let's say. So, but of course, there are secular people, atheists, non-religious people, scientists that look at religion as a form, at least to some extent, a form of delusion. So how do you approach it?
I would have, a few years ago, put myself in that group of a delusion. Yes. And I have more sympathy now for the difficulties of being human.
Yeah.
Not everybody. Richard Dawkins, he's a good friend of mine. We spoke, and we've spoken about these sorts of things. I mean, he says he gets such satisfaction out of his life of science, to learn the laws of nature, to make them clear to others, to revel in the beauty of the laws of nature, which, yes, I'm susceptible to this very, very much. That's very much my notion of transcendence, but not all of us are made for that, right? We are diverse. Diversity is spoken about so much, racial diversity, about, the most important diversity is the diversity that makes us go to different areas of the mattering map. I can't ask somebody to revel in the laws of nature and learning the laws of nature and making them clear to others that I have, or that Dawkins has. Thank goodness, in some sense, that we have many different talents, many different passions, many different interests that make us seek our mattering in different ways. It's hard to be human. Whatever is doing it for you, as long, and here's the proviso, the guardrail, as long as your way of trying to realize your mattering doesn't cause you to treat others or to regard others as mattering less than you. I think the intrinsic ethical mattering, is there in everybody, and it is, one has to respect it. And try to understand its manifestations in other people. But if your way, if your way leads to your regarding others as mattering less, this is not admissible. This is not, and one can argue on purely intellectual grounds as to why this is wrong, to the extent that any of us ethically matter. we all matter to that same extent. And, yeah, so as long as there's, a tolerance for others' way of approaching this existential dilemma that we all have, if it works for you, if you do good works by it, it's all in the works, right? It's all, if you live the kind of life that I would say is counter-entropic rather than works with entropy, you're okay, whatever you believe.
Yes, I agree with you. And through my conversations with cognitive scientists of religion, I also learned to not look at religiosity as a form of delusion and as actually a natural phenomenon, something that is also part of our evolved psychology, at least to some extent. And I've had academics on the show who are religious, and they do excellent academic work. So, I mean, and they respect science a lot, and they get information from science to inform their own work and so on. So, I mean, I don't think that religion is even necessarily a matter of believing in unreal things. So
yeah, and it could be, I mean, for many it's just a form of sort of connectedness. There's community, there's religion takes so many different forms, but I have known personally in my life religious people, including my own father, who I respect as much as I've ever respected anybody, that they, it can be a force of, as I call it, counter-entropic, working against disorder, creative, not destructive. All of these ways of trying to satisfy our longing to matter can be intolerant. When a scientist says, look, I mean, I'm doing the most important thing in the world. I'm making the universe clear to people. Why doesn't everybody do this? Why doesn't everybody seek their meaning in the way that I am? There's an urge to universalize. And it's not just transcenders who do it. It's all across the mattering map. You'd find, and I have a bunch of, statements that I've been collecting over the decades of these, these universalizing statements. So, for example, an editor, Diana Freeland, her name was. It was the editor of the fashion Vogue magazine. She was a great fashion icon, and she said, you've got to be well dressed. It's what gets you up in the morning. It gets you down the stairs. Without it, you're nothing. You're nothing. This is a statement of real denial of mattering to all of us slobs, who don't care very much about fashion. So it'd be all over, and I've got it from scientists, I've got it from artists, from novelists, from musicians, whatever it is that they are staking their life on, that there's a great propensity to universalize it and say, if it's really doing it for me, then it ought to be doing it for everybody. There's a mistake in the logic there that I'm very eager to analyze and to expose, but it comes very, very naturally to us. This is a way in which philosophers, even analytic philosophers, train to look at every statement and try to take it apart. Is it true? What would make it true? What would make it false? Can be of some use even to non-philosophers, I think.
Yes, because we have to take into account that even though we share many aspects of our psychology, there's also personality traits, there's other kinds of psychological traits that make people different in terms of their values, their interests. And so, I mean, I don't think that a universalizing project in terms of mattering and also in other aspects would be a very successful one, and also it would probably be very oppressive.
Exactly. Yes. And as I say, the guardrail, the one fundamental thing is, to the extent that any of us matter, we all matter. And anything that violates that, this is not a way to be living your life. Find another way. It's and look at your own, the role of your own ego in all of this. The self-reflection that gets us going on this project, it has to be constantly exercised in operation so that we are reflecting on the answers that we've come to and being open to other answers that are offered, or at least sympathize with other ways of doing it. And as you say, see the role of our own individual psychology, in contributing to this. You could, I love basketball players. I tell you, I can watch, I'm moved, because they can fly, they defy gravity. I wish I could be, if I could live my life over, if I could come back as anything, it would be to be a center forward. But I am 5'2". This is not a way for me to go about. There are certain limitations, physical, intellectual, emotional, that sends us on our particular mattering project. Sometimes the wrong one. Sometimes people, in fact, I write about, a very good friend of mine who was very musically talented, had gotten a fellowship to a fine conservatory, and but he and his whole life was in classical guitar. That was his instrument of choice. And then he couldn't do it. He couldn't make it. He couldn't make a living from it. Classical guitar it's very hard. There are no pieces written specifically for a classical guitar, very few, and you can't be hired by an orchestra. And anyway, he had to find, heartbreakingly, he went through, this is what we call an existential crisis, when your mattering project is failing you, or you feel that you are failing it. And you may think it's the most important thing in the world, right? But yet you have to face, maybe, no, it's not going right. Maybe it's because of you. Maybe it's because of the world. Maybe you just haven't had the lucky breaks or whatever. But don't waste your life. At a certain point, you've got to change your mattering project. And that's exactly what my friend did. He became, he got his PhD in comparative literature. He's a writer. He's a filmmaker. He's a marvelous guy. He's still an artist, because that was still, that's where his passion lay. But he changed. And so, these are all problems we face because of the need to matter.
Yeah. You mentioned basketball. For me, I'm more into soccer because of the kind of culture I was brought in. Here in Portugal, people are crazy about soccer, but I could never be an athlete because even when I was very little, 5, 6 years old, I was already very much into books and old movies. I would just want to watch all the time my mother's videotape collection of black and white movies.
Yeah, my kids too. They love the old movies. I used to show them. Yeah. So, these inclinations show themselves very early. Sometimes, parents make a terrible mistake, the same kind of mistake, of universalizing, but caring most about their kids, that like, oh, look at what philosophy has done for me. It allowed me to overcome all my existential despair and blah, blah, blah. Yes, my children, whom I love more than anything, they must be philosophers too. No, this is a mistake often that we make with the people that we love the most. That we, what has been our saving project, we think at the very least they ought to have, and sometimes parents, and I've seen this over and over again, they feel rejected. It's like, oh, so you think I don't matter, Right. Why are you not duplicating my life? Are you telling me that my way is wrong? So yeah, I mean, all of these things, it feeds into our life in so many ways, in the raising of our children, the education of our children, our political choices, in, oh God, in everything, which is why I was scared to write about the book. It just was, how do I tame this? But okay.
So, how do you think we develop our mathering projects individually?
Yeah, it is. Some of it's random. In life, things are random, but I do think we have. You mentioned personality, and there are psychologists of personality theory, and there's this one theory that I was very interested to learn about, the Murray-McClellan theory of personality, that claims that we divide up into three different types. We all have these three basic needs: the need for affiliation with one another, the need for some feeling of influence, of status, of power. Power, actually, is the way he says, power, and the need for excellence. But in different personalities, one of these three dominates, and they had tests that they had worked out, very interesting tests, to see what dominated. They were very interested in. No, they were Harvard professors. They were both Harvard professors way before my time. But and so they, giving into that urge to universalize, thought the best thing is wanting to be excellent. The need for achievement, they called it, the need for achievement, and they had programs for making people over into achievers, not affiliators, but and even trying to make countries over into achievers, right? Not everybody is going to be so happy feeling that that's what they have to do to achieve, to be what I call a heroic striver. Some of us, yes, that's what we need. But in any case, there is a way in which at least three of these, socializers, competitors, and heroic strivers, correspond to these three. Transcenders is something else again, and transcenders can take various forms. Some of them on power. Some transcenders, those are the ones who, want to convert the world to their particular religious view. Lord save us. And there are those who are heroic strivers, perhaps intellectual, perhaps ethical. And then there are those who are the socializers, those who want to work for their community, maybe perhaps becoming pastors, or, my father was a clergyman. And he was a socializer. That's what he cared about, helping other people. So it takes many different forms. Again, another reason not to condemn all religious people. Depends what form it takes.
But do you think that with the sort of individual traits that distinguish people from one another and how they get to develop their own mathering projects, it is possible to develop some sort of objective standard to distinguish between better and worse ways to respond to the mathering instinct?
Thank you for asking that question. Yes, and that's really my goal. The Spinoza, he does so much in his work, but he calls it the ethics. When I would teach it to my students, it's like, what do we have to go through all of this to get to the ethics? Yes, you have to go through all of this, but by his calling it the ethics, he's telling us that was the point of the whole project, and that's the whole point of my project too. That is these objective standards. If it's okay, we should be tolerant. It's hard to be human. However people are doing it, let them do it. But some people are doing it wrong, ethically wrong, and what's the something objective, something that can differentiate between better and worse ways of satisfying our mattering instinct, but that yet wide enough to take in all of us, transcenders, socializers, rogue strivers, and competitors too. And what I think is, I go back again to second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Life is the resistance to entropy. And, that is all of our forces and every living system is trying to push against this disorder that is our end. Disorder is death. And that's where I think we could take our wide and yet differentiating standard of distinguishing between good and bad mattering projects. The way I judge a person, myself and others, is, am I working with entropy? Is there going to be more entropy because I'm alive? Or am I battling to justify myself to myself? Am I battling in the direction of life against entropy, against disorder, against destructiveness? So anything that is creative as opposed to destructive, anything that conduces to well-being as opposed to suffering and death, beauty as opposed to ugliness, civility as opposed to dissension, all of these things, knowledge as opposed to ignorance. These are all hard things. They take so much work for our poor little overtaxed brains. They take so much work because they are counterentropic. Whatever is worth living for is counterentropic, just like life is. That's how I judge us. That's how I judge myself.
Do you think that it is possible for people to live life while acknowledging they do not matter or believing they do not matter?
It depends. If they think, look, I don't matter cosmically, I'm here for a short time, I'm going to go out of existence, nobody's going to remember me in 100 years, whatever, yeah, we can live with that. I think it's sanity. Not necessarily, I'm not going to say that all transcenders are lunatics, but I think it can be very sane and very rational. It's certainly what I believe, right? But in the sense of, I might as well not have been here at all for all the good I'm doing. I really, in this, if it's the sort of I don't matter that's indicative of I have no reason to live, no, it's not compatible with well-being. We are willing to we're willing to sacrifice our life in order to satisfy the mattering instincts, and that's what martyrs do, whether they do it for a good cause or not. It is so deep within us. And so the people I've known who have been suffering from severe depression, do you know what they say? I don't matter. Others do, right? But I don't. Nothing I can do will ever make me matter. And so that is not, it depends what you mean by I don't matter. If you're talking about the human condition, it's okay, But the interesting thing about depression is that there's also that notion of depressive realism, where it seems that people who suffer from depression at the same time also have a more objective they tend to look at things in a more realistic way. And maybe actually to convince ourselves that this, mattering project, really matters. It's hard. It's very hard because you don't want the universalizing either. If it matters, if it's really grounding my life, then why isn't it grounding your life? Why are you not doing it exactly the way I'm doing? So this is, it's all very hard. But And maybe for a lot of people, the way that they convince themselves of their mattering is a little bit delusional, right? It is this sort of, this is the way, this is the only way, it's my way or no way, that sort of thing. And that is delusional. And so, that could be contributing to why those who are depressed or compared to the general population are a bit more realistic. But it depends which group you compare the depressed to. If you compare them to scientists, philosophers, I bet they're no more realistic than we are. Most of us who live with that sense of, in the long run, we don't matter. Look, the universe is going to heat death. Nothing's going to matter, right? I mean, there's sort of, but So I think one can be a realistically fully engaged. And I think one of the best ways I find to do it is, when I think about, what? I'm fighting against entropy. I'm fighting with life. And by the way, being a good parent, raising flourishing children, that is a difficult task, and it highly counter-entropic. You don't have to be anything great or different from most people or have special talents in order to be have a mattering project that's counter-entropic. And that's hard work. That takes a tremendous amount of work. All of them do. Everything worth doing takes tremendous amount of energy.
So what do you make of approaches? I guess we've already ended up touching a little bit on nihilism, but what do you make of approaches like nihilism and absurdism? I mean, absurdism in the more, should I say Camusian sense? I'm not sure how you say it.
Right. No, it's just sort of, they're very interesting to me, because since I've become interested, unusually for an analytic philosopher in these existential questions, I took to reading them, and it's sort of, and it's interesting, everything's absurd. So what does that mean? It means, this moment that we step outside of ourselves and we look at how committed we are to this one thing in the whole universe as if it's the most important thing in the world, and how absurd that is. It's absurd, and yet we have to return to that life. We are going to pursue our life, and that makes for absurdity. My PhD advisor was the philosopher Thomas Nagel, and he has this lovely, an analytic philosopher who has this lovely article called "The Absurd," and he says, that he calls it, self-transcendence. When we step outside of ourselves and look at ourselves, it's with that sense of detached amazement. Of watching ants struggling up an anthill and sliding down and struggling up and sliding down, and that's sort of what it's like, so that captures sort of the absurdity of this thing that I think gets us going on this our mattering projects, but which is taking a step that Nagel doesn't take, and what's so interesting is that the existentialists came up with their own mattering project, which was to live with every moment of our lives with the acknowledgement of how absurd it is, and that's what courage is, that to be, Camus says in The Myth of Sisyphus at the end of it, to live defiantly, that yes, we don't really matter, but we're living as if we do, but facing every moment that we don't. And that's what makes us heroes. That's what it is to be authentic and to be a, oh my gosh, do you hear that?
Yes.
That's the sky's opening up. I have a glass roof. I literally live with a glass roof.
No, don't worry too much about it. I mean,
okay.
I can put an audio filter when I'm editing.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So anyway, so in sort of absurdity is in some sense, that's one way of putting what it is to acknowledge this incommensurable gap between what entropy demands we devote to ourselves and what we really are in this universe. Unless you're.
So do you think that, as Camus said, we should imagine Sisyphus happy, just pushing the rock up the hill, and we should think of ourselves as Sisyphus in this life?
That's right. We're just going to, yes, but being aware of how futile it really is, and that's what makes us heroes. That's what makes us authentic. We don't get pulled into and that's, I think that's fine for some. I mean, not everybody, I'm not going to tell everybody. Well, once again, universalizing, to say this is authentic and this is, not authentic is to say that some lives in some sense matter more than others. I don't think that's a good way to go. Nihilism would be to say that there is no way of distinguishing between better and worse ways of satisfying this. Putin's way, which is causing such an increase of entropy in this universe of instability, of disorder, of suffering, of death. Maiming, just uprootedness, everything, this is disorder. This is a person who, as powerful as he is not living the way he ought to be living. He is working with entropy instead of against it. There's a mother who I feature at the end of the book, a woman who I didn't know her. I only got to meet her daughter, but an extraordinary person this mother had been. She was in China, lived in China as her daughter lives in China, and had, during the period when there was the one child per family dictum from the government, and all of these, given you can have only one child, people wanted a boy and not a girl. Boys matter more than girls, and so she was a garbage collector. She would, take it to the recycling, and the poorest person in the world didn't even have a roof over her head. She found babies, little girls that parents had left out on the street or in garbage dumps or dumpsters or in the bathroom. She raised more than 30 little girls. This impoverished woman, I have pictures of her in the book, that her daughter who was found, was not. And so this is somebody, I compare her to Putin. this impoverished woman who is responsible for all of these lives, who gave everything, and she found some Jello or whatever, would go to the children. Anyway, that this is, and somehow we know this, we intuitively know, we feel moved by such people. So I think that this, a way of trying to capture what distinguishes the good projects from the bad is entropy. It starts with entropy, it ends with entropy. I'm really an entropically obsessed person. I've always that I think it has a tremendous amount to teach us.
Yeah, I have to say that I got tricked by Camus into liking absurdism, because when I read The Myth of Sisyphus when I was around 20, I start reading the book, and then at a certain point he starts talking about Dostoevsky, Kafka, Herman Melville, and I was like, oh, come on, are you really mentioning all of my favorite writers?
Yes. And then, of course, all these people are worth mentioning because they were heroic strivers and they achieved something amazing. They all achieved something amazing. But, we can't put that out as the standard for living a good life. That's not fair. And anyway, extraordinariness can come in many, many different forms. That Chinese mother was extraordinary. what it took to be able to do what she did. And then I asked this, the daughter, her name is Juju, did you ever try to get in touch with your birth mother to find out who your birth mother is? And she started crying, and she said, I had the best mother in the world. Nobody could have a better mother. To have done such a thing in this world is something to applaud. So yeah, I think there are objective values, and I think science, can tell us what they are in terms of counter entropy. Are you working with entropy, or are you working against it? I think that's the best standard that I've come up with for judging a person's life.
Okay, so let me just ask you one last question, and as a philosopher, I think this will be a provocative question for you. So,
as if these other questions haven't been provocative.
Yeah, but I think this one in particular. Okay. I mean, do you agree when Socrates, or at least this is a quote attributed to him, when Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living?
Depends what he meant by that. I don't like this statement because I don't like anything that entails some people are of no value,
Mm-hmm. No.
We are all of value. We are all of value. But if he's saying, that if you've just adopted these norms of justification that were passively given to you, and you haven't used your power of self-reflection to examine them, you've got some work to do. You get back to work. And of course, he was addressing the Athenians, who were people who thought that the Athenians were better than everybody else in the world. Just to be born an Athenian was to be better than everybody else, including fellow Greeks. And they were always warring with people and blah blah, And of course, in that time, that was a quite frequent thing for various empires, inhabitants of empires to think. But they really, they believed this very much. And he was taking that on. He was telling his fellow Athenians, don't just passively think that you matter because you happen to have been born an Athenian. It's much harder than that. That if that's what he was saying, as I do believe he was saying, then yes, I agree with him. I totally agree with him. We shouldn't just passively accept the norm by which we justify ourselves and often condemn others. Yeah. Does that seem right? So I always like to use the principle of maximum charity in interpreting others, including philosophers, including a great philosopher like Socrates, as filtered through Plato, who I like very much. I like Plato very much. Yes.
Well, I mean, for me personally, I think that wherever he meant by that, I still think that the unexamined life can be worth living.
Yeah. It depends what you mean. Look, it's as long as I have a friend who he developed the what did he develop? I think he developed the way of treating children who were born to mothers who had AIDS, to immediately being able to treat them when they were born, and so that they were able to survive and live. And then he told me that he's a wonderful man, and he told me that he's been haunted by the view that so many of these children who lived were born into terrible circumstances, into impoverished, difficult, disordered lives, and that he feels guilty about this. Maybe by developing this medicine, he increased misery in the world. So this is it was interesting thought. And I said, I bet if you went to every one of those children now and asked them, "Are you glad that you are alive rather than never to have been born?" They would say yes. That there is something of such value in every human life, and we feel this. We could feel this in ourselves. We feel it in others, whether they're living examined lives or not.
Yeah. Okay. So, look, I'm seeing that we've reached our time limit. So let's end the interview here. And the book is, again, The Mattering Instinct, How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. I'm, of course, leaving a link to it in the description of the interview. And Dr. Goldstein, thank you so much for coming on the show again. It's always a big pleasure to talk with you.
Oh boy, I could talk to you forever. I love talking to you. And perhaps
maybe we'll have to have another one of these conversations sooner rather than later, instead of waiting for another 7 years.
That's right, another pandemic, another whatever. But yes, I would love that. You're a wonderful discussant.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingburg, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetrio, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Mark Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Mikkel Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Labyrinth, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londoño Correia, Yannick Punter, Dana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavla Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeagy, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Lowacki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry D. Lee Jr., Old Erringbon, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismail Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers: Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugni, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, John Carlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.